Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host. I'm actually coming to you from our terminal at Pittston, Pennsylvania, and I'm staying in a bunk room because my truck's in the shop, so we got to get a little bit of work done on it, but it needed to get done anyway. Had a fairly uneventful trip, but there was a lot of snow last night and into this morning on the final leg of our trip to make our delivery here in Pennsylvania. So the trailer we had was having some problems, so that was the original reason to come over here to Pittston. But my truck has a crack in the front suspension that needs to be fixed. Then it's going to have to get a front end alignment because of that. But I also need work done on my bunk heater and chassis lube. So Paul, my co-driver, and I both got bunk rooms. So, and they're pretty nice. I mean, it's like a small hotel room, I guess you'd call it. Bed, TV, nightstand, comfortable chair, which I'm sitting in now. So today is the 80th anniversary of the Japanese attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And I wanted to talk about that because something's happened over the past, I don't know when it was announced exactly, but a guy that's really been kind of a hero of mine since I was a kid, is having an aircraft carrier named after him. And I wanted to kind of talk about him today and share some thoughts about his service and what it means to have a carrier named after you. It's a huge deal. And so taking you back to December 7th, 1941, and in particular on the USS West Virginia, there's a mess man, a Navy cook, basically, but not even really a cook, like a guy that just like serves food. He doesn't make it, he serves it. And this guy is an African-American man named Doris Miller. And Doris Miller was born in Waco, Texas. He's a big dude, and I'm going to show you his picture here in a minute. But anyway, he doesn't really do great in school. He enlists in the Navy in 1939. And he first serves on the USS Pyro, which is an ammunition ship, but then later transfers to the USS West Virginia, which is a battleship. And so it is that on December 7th, 1941, Doris Miller, or as he's been called Dory Miller, but there's a little bit of question about whether he actually went by that or not. But anyway, Petty Officer Miller is on the ship that morning. It's Sunday morning, the Japanese attack. Now, the position of the West Virginia was such that it was on the outboard side of another battleship, the USS Tennessee, and so it put it in the line of fire more readily for Japanese torpedo bombers. And the ship is quickly hit by a number of Japanese torpedoes. Although, interestingly, the captain of the West Virginia, a guy by the name of Captain Mervyn Benion, who was a Naval Academy graduate, he is mortally wounded by a shard of shrapnel from a bomb that detonated on the neighboring USS Tennessee, and he's basically has his whole abdomen ripped open. He will later receive the Medal of Honor for his actions that day because he refuses to leave the bridge area of his ship and is instead carried behind the bridge to one of the signal bridges and continues to direct the efforts to counterattack and to save his ship. The ship ultimately does sink, but after the initial attack, Doris Miller goes to his battle station, which is actually amidships. And the important context here, I think, is that Doris Miller is a black man, and the U.S. military was still segregated at the time of the attack, even though he served on the crew of a U.S. Navy ship. He served in a capacity that did not allow him to. He didn't handle weapons. He wasn't in the engineering department, and he couldn't be a radio man or a bosun's mate or a signalman or a quartermaster. He basically had a service job, right? He served food, but he did have a battle station, and his battle station was to basically carry ammunition. Well, he goes to his battle station and he discovers it's already been wiped out because, as I said, West Virginia took several torpedo hits and damage was extensive. So he's grabbed by one of the officers and is told to go up to the bridge. And there he's basically being instructed to get ammunition for some 50 caliber machine guns. Now, mind you, this is a guy who's not been trained to use any weapons like this because that just wasn't his status. But what he ends up doing is he not only gets the ammunition, but he figures out quickly, and this is a guy who didn't even graduate high school, but he figures out quickly how to not only load these machine guns, but to really employ them. And he begins returning fire and shooting at Japanese planes as they're flying by his ship. And ultimately, he's credited with shooting 2 planes down. But I want to, it's important to understand that he is, at this point, already doing something way above what he's been trained to. It's not like he was a Marine and every Marine's a rifleman. This was the Navy didn't train him to do anything like this. It trained him to carry stuff around, whether it was food or ammo. But it didn't train him to fire the machine guns or anything like that. Well, then he also helps to move Captain Benny in because he's a big, strong guy. He was 6'3", weighed about 200 pounds. And eventually, as the ship is being abandoned, because what engineers on the West Virginia did is to counteract the effects of the torpedo damage to the ship, they counter-flooded compartments on the opposite side of the ship to keep the ship from capsizing. There's a very famous picture of the USS Oklahoma that did capsize, and it's completely upside down in the harbor. But engineers, damage controlmen, hull technicians, they counterflood the ship, and the ship basically just sinks, but not very deeply. And most of these ships actually came back to fight during World War II. They were refloated, salvaged, everything was put back in order. But Miller is then given the task of basically going around and finding guys that are badly wounded and getting them down to the main deck so they can be evacuated from the ship. Because by this time, it's pandemonium. There are huge fires burning all over the harbor. The harbor itself is on fire from floating oil. And Miller, if you see the movie Forrest Gump, reading accounts of Miller's actions that day, it just feels like a Forrest Gump moment, right? Like the guy who really didn't, everybody just kind of told him what to do. He just takes it upon himself and he just starts moving, wounded people by himself. And in so doing, he really makes sure that a bunch of people get evacuated from the ship that might have been left behind. And you know, this attack was so devastating that it didn't, you know, it wouldn't have been unreasonable to believe that guys would have died. And in fact, um, that's what he was cited for. But let me show you a picture of Miller, because he receives the Navy Cross. And let me show you a picture of Miller, and then we'll talk about his award. Okay, so you can see Miller's looks like a pretty strapping guy, and in his award certificate, it's described that he helped save a number of sailors' lives by just evacuating them on his own, and you know, like just grabbing people up and getting them to safety. And here's a picture of Admiral Nimitz pinning the Navy Cross, the second highest award for valor in the Navy, on Doris Miller. And I should also add there's a little Texas component, because I told you Doris Miller was born in Waco. Chester Nimitz was from Fredericksburg, Texas. So here's two Texans, both Navy men, you know, at this ceremony. So take a look at that picture. So after, and I should also add that Miller initially is put in for like a letter of commendation, and people start to find out what happened, and there's this groundswell of support, mostly in the black community, for giving him a medal. And I will tell you that based on what he did, and I've read hundreds of award certificates over the years, especially Medal of Honor award certificates. If you study the medals of honor presented to naval personnel, naval enlisted personnel especially, there's zero doubt in my mind that had Doris Miller been a white guy, he would have received the Medal of Honor, just based on his actions. And the reason I say that is the Medal of Honor requirements, the very first thing it says is conspicuous gallantry. His actions were very conspicuous that day. That's how everything became known. But he risked his own life, and he carried out duties that he was not trained for in a way that was exemplary. He didn't just fire a machine gun. He's credited with bringing 2 Japanese planes down. He didn't just move his captain when somebody asked him. He moved, you know, a number of people and directly impacted them surviving the battle. Captain Bennion did not survive the battle. He was too badly wounded. But it's clear that Doris Miller's actions that day were, you know, of the highest order, especially given his lack of training. But he just displayed this willingness to fight. And so later on, he is eventually awarded the Navy Cross. And the thing to keep in mind is back then the Distinguished Service Medal, not the Distinguished Service Cross, which is equivalent to the Navy Cross, but for Army personnel. But the Distinguished Service Medal was the second highest award, and that was changed by congressional order. And also, I will say that there have been several attempts over the years, most of them coming in the past 10 years, to award Doris Miller the Medal of Honor. But anyway, what happened was he became like a poster child, and you know, of naval heroics and his actions during the battle. And he was sent on tours, and he did recruiting stuff, war bond drives. And at first they weren't going to put him on it, but then there was this uproar, and you know, we needed to get everybody in the war, not just white guys. And so that was part of it too. It's like everything that he got, there had to be some kind of intervening action. And here's a picture of a poster that they put together for him. So anyway, Doris Miller's story doesn't end there. He does go on these war bond drives. He recruits people in the black community, and he does his duties. Well, then he is eventually assigned to the USS Liscum Bay. And the Liscum Bay, and he was on another ship immediately after the West Virginia. But anyway, he serves on the Liscum Bay. He's on the pre-commissioning crew actually, and the Liscum Bay is commissioned, and that ship is an escort carrier. Unfortunately, during the invasion of Makin Island, and that was in the same chain as I believe Tarawa was, so famous Marine Corps invasion of Tarawa. That ship, the Liscum Bay, is struck by a Japanese torpedo, and it detonates her after magazines, and the ship sinks in 23 minutes. 644 officers and enlisted personnel are killed or lost during that sinking, including Doris Miller. That was the deadliest sinking of a U.S. aircraft carrier in U.S. naval history. There were more men killed on the USS Franklin D. Roosevelt when she was attacked in, I think it was early 1945 by a Japanese kamikaze bomber. But the Franklin D. Roosevelt was a CVA, so it was a mainline aircraft carrier. Liscum Bay was a much smaller aircraft carrier. It was designed to provide invasion support ferry aircraft, but it wasn't a top of the line aircraft carrier. So, circling back now 80 years hence, the Navy has announced that Doris Miller will be the name of the to-be-commissioned Gerald R. Ford class aircraft carrier. The USS Doris Miller's hull number will be CVN 81. She will be commissioned, I believe, in 2032. So it's a few years out. She won't be laid down until I think 2026, and probably launched 3 years later. But I wanted to, and let me just show you what her emblem is going to look like here. I found a picture of it online. But I wanted to focus this 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And by the way, there's probably only there are just a very small number of men or women who were present at the attack that day, still alive. I did read about a gentleman, he's 101 years old, and he was going to be in Pearl Harbor today, so I hope he was able to make it. And they actually had a YouTube, or excuse me, a GoFundMe campaign to get him out there, along with all of the caregivers that he would need. So hopefully that happened. But I wanted to coming back to the USS Doris Miller. Now there was a frigate named USS Miller, not Doris Miller. And Miller's a fairly common name, you know, so, but that was named after Doris Miller. But it's important, I think it's really, really important to understand the significance of the USS Doris Miller. First of all, it's named after him, and there's no confusion about it. But second of all, this is an enormous capital ship. It's an honor to have any ship named after somebody. but there are just a very, very tiny few human beings that have had aircraft carriers named after them. And that I can think of, there is no aircraft carrier that has ever been named after a black person. Secondly, I cannot think of any aircraft carrier that's ever been named after an enlisted person. So there are carriers named like Nimitz. There are carriers named after presidents like Eisenhower. You know, I mentioned Gerald R. Ford, Theodore Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and you know that you know, and then there have been aircraft carriers named after senators like John C. Stennis. There have been aircraft carriers named after the first Secretary of Defense, who was James Forrestal. And then we have had traditional names of capital ships like Enterprise, Constellation, Ranger. John F. Kennedy had an aircraft carrier named after him. We had a carrier called the USS America. But we have never had a carrier named after a black person. We've never had a carrier named after an enlisted person. And the idea that this carrier is going to be named after Doris Miller is pretty incredible. It's history making in and of itself. I still believe at some point, maybe, Doris Miller will be, he'll receive the Medal of Honor for his actions. But I think that the Navy has acknowledged, even though the Navy has no power to award that medal to him, it would have to come through a congressional action and signed off by the president. But the Navy does have a lot of say in who ships are named after. And so I think it's an incredible honor. And you know, I should say this, there are a lot of things named after Doris Miller. There have been numerous schools, parks, just, you know, community centers and stuff like that. He has been in the consciousness of Americans for a long time. But I think it's a great thing that this carrier is going to be named after him, because, you know, once a carrier is named, you know, thousands of men will serve on that, men and women, will serve on that aircraft carrier over its life. That carrier will be around long after I'm gone. It'll still be sailing the seas. So it's really cool, and I've been wanting to talk about this guy for a long time, and you know, it's the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, and so it's a good day to think about that and talk about that. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. You know, I love talking about naval history, and I love recognizing people that aren't so famous, or weren't such a big deal when they were, you know, they were just a guy that went above and beyond the call of duty, and it's an impressive story. So, and unfortunately, he, like thousands and thousands of other men his age, never made it home from the war. He's entombed somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, and you know, but his service isn't forgotten, and I think that's really cool. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully we'll get back on the road in the morning and, you know, drive around America some more. So, again, we will talk to you soon. Be safe out there, man. I hit a lot of snow this morning. A big Lake Erie kind of snowstorm. So, it's definitely winter. And I'll talk to you guys soon.